We'll just move up.
Uh,
Hello,
Hello, I'm
can
audible.
you hear me? Yes,
Professor Sardella, Professor Sardella,
yes,
can you hear me?
that's me. I
Okay,
can hear you very well.
okay. So I'm just trying to figure out where do I see. Yeah, now I see you. All right. So welcome to the keynote session here. It's an honor and privilege to introduce and welcome Professor Ferdinando Sardella. Before we go on to listen to him today, let me take a couple of minutes to introduce him and his work. He's a professor in the history of religions at Stockholm University and is also a research fellow at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. His research examines how modern Hinduism, especially the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, has been reshaped, influenced by colonial, post-colonial, and transnational dynamics. His research uses archival, textual, and ethnographic methods. So all three kinds of modes of inquiry, and archival, textual, and ethnographic, comes together in his project to talk about how Gaudiya Vaishnavism took or acquired different shapes during the colonial and post-colonial periods. His works include Modern Hindu Personalism, which Oxford brought out, and the Handbook of Hinduism in Europe, which Brill brought out. With this short introduction about his research, we can briefly talk about what he teaches. His teaching interests spans across Asian traditions, linking historical contexts and key concepts to contemporary practice. So that is, his historical awareness is also connected with the contemporary developments in the world around us. With this brief introduction, let me hand over the podium to Professor Ferdinando Sardella. And ladies and gentlemen, can we give a warm round of applause and welcome him to the event. Thank you so much, Professor Sardella, and the mic is yours.
Yes, thank you. I need to have the screen on my computer. So how can I do that? That's my question. I cannot hear you.
Professor Sardella?
Yes.
Can you hear me? To
I
your
can hear.
right-hand corner, to the right,
Yeah.
there should be a button called Share.
Share. Okay.
Click on that.
Click on that. Yeah, I did that.
Share entire screen.
Let me see. Yeah, I have it in Swedish. That's my challenge. Oh yeah. I cannot. I'm really sorry, but it doesn't seem to work for me.
Yes, tips. Okay.
No, it doesn't.
Professor Sardella, if you can
Yes.
send me your PPT on WhatsApp, we can show it to people.
Okay, okay, I'll do
The
that.
sound is very clear. We are able to hear you, but we
Very
will
good.
show this screen or the PPT over here.
All right. Yeah, that's maybe the practical. Just give me a second to do that. There.
You can share to me also, Dr. Ferdinando, on Sumanta Rudra.
Yes, I send it to both of you.
Yeah.
So I send you both.
Yeah.
That's maybe easier.
Yeah, I've received it. Yeah.
And I tell you when to move forward. Thank you. So, good morning to everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I am very grateful to the organizers at IIT Bhubaneswar for including me in this conference and for the chance to join you, even if only through a screen, from a rather cold and dark Stockholm. It feels slightly strange to sit in Sweden and speak about Dharma in front of an Indian audience, which I love. The word Dharma is alive in this context in a way that it simply is not in Northern Europe. You can show the next slide. It appears in political speeches, in legal debates, in everyday conversations, as well as in temples and ashrams. In Sweden, if I speak about Dharma, I usually first have to explain that it is not just religion or law, but something more complicated. So that difference is in the back of my mind as I speak today. My training is in the history of religions, and most of my research has focused on modern Hindu devotional movements, especially the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition and its global spread. You can show the next slide. The next one. Thank you. Coming from that background, I want to say something quite simple, although I will use some technical language. Whenever we write about Dharma, we are never just describing an object. We are always, in some way, talking about how people ought to live, what counts as a good life, and what is regarded as a reliable source of guidance. In other words, we are always already in the territory of normative questions, whether we admit it or not. The title I have given this talk is Revisiting the Historiography of Dharma, Hermeneutics, Modernity, and the Question of Normativity. By historiography, I simply mean the stories that scholars tell about the past. By hermeneutics, the theories and practices of interpretation that lie behind those stories. And by normativity, very broadly, the ways in which ideas about Dharma claim to say something about what should be done or what is right. The central question I would like to explore is the following. How can we write the history of Dharma in a way that does justice both to its historical variability and to its continued role as a source of guidance and meaning? How do we avoid reducing it either to a kind of legal code or, on the other side, to a vague spiritual abstraction? Next slide. I will move in 3 steps, but I will not be very rigid about the borders between them. First, I will sketch some large-scale shifts in how Dharma has been written about in the modern period, mainly in the English language, academic, and colonial context. Second, I will turn to the Chaitanya or Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition with particularly attention to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati as a case where Dharma is rethought under modern conditions. Third, I will try to draw a few methodological consequences for how we might study Dharma today. Next slide. Let me start then with the historiographical part. When Dharma becomes an object of modern scholarship in the 19th century, this happens largely through colonial administration and Orientalist philology. As you know, British officials needed some way of speaking about Hindu law for use in the courts. They turned to Brahmanical experts, to the Dharma Shastra corpus, and to a growing body of translations and legal digests. In this setting, Dharma increasingly appears under the heading of law, duty, or religious obligation. We can make this very concrete. Imagine a dispute over inheritance in late 19th century Bengal. A British judge trained in English common law has to decide whether a daughter can claim a share in the family property. The court calls in a pandit and asks, what does Hindu law say? The pandit reaches for Manusmriti or Mitakshara, cites a verse, and the judge records this as Hindu law of inheritance. In the process, a complex field of Dharma with its ritual, narrative, and cosmological dimensions is filtered down into a rule about which child receives which share of land. For the litigants, this may be an urgent moral question within a web of kinship. For the court, it becomes a point of legal precedent. The picture of Dharma that results from this is shaped by that context. It is presented as a more or less systematic set of rules governing caste, inheritance, marriage, punishment, ritual obligations, and so on. It is not that the cosmological or spiritual background is denied, but when the focus is on what can be codified, commented, and applied in court, other aspects fade out of view. The result is that Dharma comes to resemble a legal system in the European sense, which is then amenable to comparative jurisprudence. Something similar, though with a rather different motivation, happens in much early academic Indology. Scholars work with Dharma Shastra texts as sources for reconstructing Indians' legal and social history. Again, this is an important and serious enterprise. But the risk is that Dharma is silently reduced to what can be put into the genre of law. Next slide. A second set of voices emerges from within South Asia itself among religious and social reformers in the 19th and early 20th century. These figures are extremely diverse, but many of them engage in a re-reading of Dharma in the light of new ideas about morality, rationality, and progress. For some, Dharma becomes associated with universal ethical principles, such as truthfulness, nonviolence, concern for the poor, education of women, principles that can be defended in a public, even global arena. Here it helps to think of a well-known episode, the campaign against sati. For British missionaries, sati is a sign of the cruelty of Hindu religion. For many colonial officials, it is staged in terms of it is a legal and administrative problem. For someone like Ramohan Roy, however, the debate is staged in terms of Dharma. What does true Dharma require of a husband and a wife? He appeals to certain scriptural passages and ignores others. He argues that a cruel custom cannot be genuine Dharma. In doing so, he is not only negotiating with the colonial state, he also redefining what counts as Dharma for his own community. Here, Dharma is sometimes detached from caste rules and ritual details and is presented as a more interior quality, a matter of conscience, of individual self-discipline, of compassionate action. In this way, Dharma is mobilized both as a defense of Indian traditions against Western criticism and as a tool for internal critique and reform. In many reformist writings, it moves closer to what European readers would call ethics or morality. Next slide. In the later 20th century and into the 21st, a third type of discourse gains strength: postcolonial, feminist, Dalit, and other critical perspectives. From this angle, scholars and activists scrutinize how appeals to Dharma have been used to justify hierarchical social orders, gender inequality, and caste oppression, or to legitimize the authority of certain elites. Instead of asking, what is Dharma? They ask, who benefits when something is called Dharma? And who has the power to define it? Think, for example, of a village dispute where a woman is expelled from her husband's house and the elders declare that this is according to Dharma. A feminist or Dalit critique will not start by asking whether the elders have interpreted Manusmriti correctly. She will begin with the social fact. A vulnerable person has been excluded, and the word Dharma has been used to silence dissent. That shift of attention from texts to power relations is characteristic of this third strand. This line of inquiry has had a major impact. It makes visible the entanglement of Dharma with power, which earlier idealizing accounts had often obscured. At the same time, it sometimes treats Dharma almost exclusively as an instrument of control, or as a discourse that masks economic and political interests. If I try to stand back from these three strands, the colonial legal, the reformist, and the critical, I see a pattern. All three, in different ways, tend to treat Dharma as a category that can be translated into modern terms, as law, as ethics, or as ideology. In each case, in this case, sorry. In this case, in each case, there are good reasons for doing so. These translations help us see certain things very clearly. But something is lost. The older sense of Dharma as connected to the structure of reality, to a cosmic or metaphysical order, and not only to social rules. Now, one might say, perhaps that metaphysical dimension is precisely what we should strip away if we want a scientific or critical account. I understand that impulse, but in doing so, we risk misunderstanding what Dharma actually is for the actors we study, especially in devotional or theological contexts. For many of them, Dharma does not just tell you what is allowed or forbidden. It tells you what kind of world you live in. Next slide. To illustrate that, let me turn to a tradition I know a bit more intimately. The Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, which grows around the figure of Chaitanya, important for Orissa, in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, is a rich field for thinking about Dharma in this broader sense. I will say only a few things. Many of you will know the sources better than I do. Chaitanya himself does not leave behind a systematic treatise on Dharma. We encounter him mainly through hagiographical or theological works produced by his followers, such as the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Mangala, and so on. In those texts, Dharma is not usually at the center as a separate topic. It is woven into a larger narrative about devotion, grace, and the nature of the self. One key motive, however, is that there is a higher or ultimate Dharma that transcends ordinary social roles. This is sometimes linked to the Bhagavata Purana's notion of a paradharma, in which loving service to God is described as the supreme concern of human life. In the Gaudiya context, this becomes deeply elaborated, especially in relation to Krishna and Radha. To live in accordance with Dharma is, in this perspective, to live in accordance with one's true identity as a servant and lover of the divine. We can see this most clearly not in an abstract definition, but in particular scenes. One of the best-known episodes from Chaitanya's life is his nocturnal kirtan in Navadvip, where men and women, high caste and low caste, gather in what outsiders experience as ecstatic, even disturbing, forms of singing and dancing. The local Qazi tries to forbid this practice, arguing from the standpoint of imperial law and public order. Chaitanya confronts him not with a legal argument, but with a different understanding of what is appropriate in the present age. For him, congregational kirtan is not a marginal emotional excess. It is the proper dharma for Kali Yuga. That may sound abstract, but in practice, it is not. It shapes daily routines, forms of community, disciplines of the body, speech, and mind. Take something as simple as congregational kirtan, which was so central to Chaitanya's own practice. On one level, it is a collective ritual. People meet, they sing, They move together, they follow certain patterns. On another level, for practitioners, this is an enactment of Dharma. It is a way of aligning oneself with what is taken to be the true order of things, a world governed not by competition and fear, but by the exchange of love between God and the soul. Here, Dharma is not a code that stands outside life. It is more like a form of life, to use a Wittgenstein's expression, that has its own internal logic and its own sense of fit between inner and outer, belief and practice. If we approach this only through the categories of law or ethics, we would reduce something quite complex to the levels of rules. Next slide. Now, let me jump forward to the early 20th century and to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who founded the Gaudiya Math, a practical institution, and who plays a decisive role in representing the Chaitanya tradition under modern conditions. Again, I will focus on just a few features. Bhaktisiddhanta grows up at a time when printed books, journals, and new educational institutions are transforming the religious landscape of Bengal. He inherits a deeply scripturalist and devotional vision from his father, Bhaktivinoda, and from earlier Gaudiya teachers such as Jiva Goswami and others. At the same time, he is intensely aware of the pressures of colonial modernity, the prestige of science, the rise of nationalism, the fascination with socialism and other political projects, the spread of new cultural ideas. In his writing, Dharma appears both as a revealed standard and as a critical lens. He often describes contemporary society as a wrong civilization, one that misleads people by promising physical happiness through material improvement alone. In that setting, Dharma is not a nostalgic survival from the past. It is a way of naming what is wrong with the present and of pointing to another possibility. One illustrative case is his response to debates on education. Many Bengali intellectuals argue that the task of schools was to produce efficient citizens, good administrators, engineers, lawyers, perhaps also patriots. Very good ideas. Bhaktisiddhanta does not deny the usefulness of such skills, of course, but he insists that an education which ignores the ultimate purpose of life is, in his words, cleverness in the service of death. For him, a curriculum that never raises the question of dharma, of the duties of the soul in relation to God, for example, and others, is fundamentally incomplete, no matter how technically advanced it may be. That is not simply rhetoric. It is a different ranking of values. It does this, importantly, not by retreating into a purely inward spiritualism. He organizes missions, the Gaudiya Math. They had 64 centers in India and others in England, for example, and in Burma. Involves himself in public debates, founds a whole network of institutions, and uses newspapers and journals as vehicles for Dharma-based critique. Sorry. He also draws on scientific and rationalist vocabulary, sometimes quite strategically, to argue that a life oriented to God is not irrational, but from his standpoint, more rational than a life oriented only to economic growth or political power. A famous controversy illustrates this tension. In the early 1930s, Bengal was hit by natural disasters and severe hardship. At roughly the same time, the Gaudiya Math spent considerable resources on a large theistic exhibition in Kolkata with dioramas, lectures, and printed materials on Chaitanya's theology and philosophy. Critics in the Bengali press asked, how can you justify spending money on religious propaganda when people are starving? Bhaktisiddhanta's reply is not sentimental. He argues that temporary relief is necessary, but insufficient if the underlying godlessness of society remains unchanged. From his perspective, spending money on teaching Dharma is not a diversion from social responsibility, but a deeper form of it. Whether one agrees with him or not, the point is that Dharma functions here as a principle for evaluating economic priorities. So we see an interesting combination, a very traditional, indeed conservative theological framework, and a very modern sense of communication, organization, and public engagement as well. In his hands, Dharma functions both as continuity with the 16th century Ganga-based Bhakti tradition and as a way of judging the values of the 20th century. For us, as historians and theorists, this poses a challenge. If we apply only the tools of critical social analysis, we may end up saying Bhaktisiddhanta uses Dharma to legitimize his institutional authority. That is partly true. If we apply only the tools of history of ideas, we may say he reinterprets Dharma to make it compatible with modern science and global evangelism. Also true. But there is something else going on. For him and for his followers, Dharma names a way the world actually is. It is not a metaphor. It is a claim about reality. This is where our categories begin to crack. If you insist on separating facts and values too sharply, or if you keep metaphysics in a sealed box, we cannot quite say what Bhaktisiddhanta is doing with Dharma. His thought is not neatly divided into a descriptive part and a normative part. They are woven together. In the final part of my talk, I would like to reflect briefly on what this means for us when we try to study Dharma today. I mentioned earlier two attitudes that I find problematic if they are taken as exclusive options. One is a strictly descriptive, supposedly neutral historiography. The other is a straightforward moral philosophical appropriation. Let me say a word more about each. The descriptive approach says, in effect, we will map how the term Dharma has been used in different periods and contexts. We will reconstruct the debates, the institutions, the legal codes, the reforms, the protests. We will not make a stand on whether any understanding of Dharma is truer or better than another. That is not our job. Unquote. There is much to be said for this modesty. It can serve as a healthy antidote to theological or nationalist narratives that claim exclusive authority. But this modesty can also become a kind of blindness. If we treat Dharma purely as an object, we ignore the fact that part of what Dharma does is to call into question the very frameworks that we ourselves are using and our subjectivity. For example, when a tradition insists that Dharma is inseparable from a certain view of reality, we cannot fully understand that claim if we bracket it as mere belief and assume that a secular ontology is the neutral starting point. The moral philosophical approach, on the other hand, says, quote, let us translate Dharma into terms that fit our ethical theories, duty, virtue, consequences, and then we will see how it compares to Immanuel Kant, or to utilitarianism, or to contemporary debates on justice and rights, unquote. Again, there is much to be learned from such comparisons, of course. But if we strip away the ritual, narrative, and metaphysical context in order to make Dharma manageable for ethics, we risk changing the subject. We may be talking about something important, but it may no longer be Dharma as understood in the traditions we are supposedly studying. Next slide. What I would like to suggest instead is something slightly untidy, but perhaps more realistic, a double way of reading. On the one hand, we keep doing careful historical and social analysis. We study how Dharma is used in legal documents, in court cases, in political speeches, in reform movements, in temple disputes, in online debates. We do not romanticize it. We pay attention to who gains and who loses when Dharma is invoked. On the other hand, we also listen to how Dharma is understood from within the traditions that speak about it. We take seriously the idea that Dharma can be more than a label for rules, that it can involve claims about the nature of the self, the structure of reality, and the purpose of human life. We do not have to endorse those claims in order to try to grasp their internal logic and their force. Holding these two perspectives together is not easy. It complicates the neat separation between description and evaluation. It also forces us to look at our we take seriously the idea that Dharma can be more than a label for rules, that it can involve claims about the nature of the self, the structure of reality, and the purpose of human life, as I read before. Holding these two perspectives together is not easy. It complicates the neat separation. It also forces us to look at our own assumptions, our modern categories, such as religion, law, ethics, politics, and spirituality, do not necessarily cut the phenomena at the joins. If we apply them too rigidly, we may miss how Dharma actually operates in the world. What does this mean in practice? Let me end with 3 brief points, more as invitation to further discussion than as conclusions. First, when we study Dharma, we should resist the temptation to tell a simple story of decline or of secularization. The Gaudiya case with Bhaktisiddhantas and others show that modernization can involve not only loss, but also creative re-articulation. Institutions and media change, ideas of Dharma change with them, but the sense that there is something more than social convention at stake does not disappear. Second, we should make room for conversations across disciplinary boundaries. Historians, philosophers, theologians, jurists, and social scientists will see different aspects of Dharma, and none of them will see everything. It may be uncomfortable, but it is probably necessary to allow these perspectives to question one another. And third, and finally, when we write the history of Dharma, we should be honest about the fact that we are not standing outside the field we describe. Our accounts help to shape how future generations in India and elsewhere will understand this world and the realities it points to. That does not mean that we should turn our scholarship into some kind of preaching. It does not mean that we are responsible for the frames we reproduce or the challenges. To revisit the historiography of Dharma, then, is not just to add more data or correct earlier mistakes. It is also to ask ourselves what we are doing when we speak and write about this concept at all, whether in Bhubaneswar, Stockholm, or anywhere else. But we stop here. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you so much, Professor Sardella. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear.
That was indeed quite fascinating, and I do mean to say that it's one of the most rewarding interventions that we have heard over the last couple of days that we have assembled here. And before I open up the space for a quick Q&A, let me just give a brief summary of what he has said, the length and breadth of it. He began with three paradigms within which we can talk about the historiography of Dharma since the last couple of centuries. One would be the colonial legal one. The other one, the colonial legal one, which began to see Dharma as a law. The other one would be the reformist position that turns Dharma into a question of ethics and the questions that attend with the question of ethics. And the third one would be the critical readings, more contemporary critical readings from post-colonial to Dalit studies, including gender studies or via gender studies. So how these readings, useful interventions, all three of them, colonial and reformist and the legal and reformist and the post-colonial ones, they're all useful readings. The last one turns Dharma into a question of ideology and takes account of the power relations which deeply inform it. So then he goes on to say that, yeah, these are useful interventions, but then is there something that we lose in the process, or what exactly is the nature of Dharma that we fail to grasp in these three modes of interventions? And then he concludes his talk by talking about a double way of reading, which would be about the historical awareness, the historical awareness of the legal positions, the reformist positions, and the critical reading positions, and then also to talk about something, the internal landscape, what Dharma does to the internal landscape and how it operates there. So these are and he suggests a way forward, this double way of reading. So with this, I'll open up the conversation by myself asking a query, a gentle query, if I may, which would be, do you see, Professor Sardella, that there would be a moment where this historical reading and the internal reading can come into a moment of conflict between them? So in those moments of conflict, when the historical analysis and the internal attention to the dharmic world or the internal landscape, do you see that there can be moments of conflict? And then if a conflict arises, what would be a response to that? Does it make sense?
Oh, yes. Thank you. A very deep question, indeed. I would say here in Europe, we have a tradition of doing research about the history of religions, that is my field, from the point of emic and ethic perspective. So with ethic perspective, there would be from the outsider perspective, which is related here in my presentation to law, for example, ethics, from the outside perspective. But the emic perspective is also important, specifically in the kind of research we do today about the living religion. And that means the need of studying the perspective about reality that may be very different within different contexts, but it's important in order to understand both sides, which is at the end what I try to present, at the same time. So depending on the perspective of the scholar, sometimes it may be like the need to be more objective, while in another context, for example, the subject which is researched is also very important, because that gives a more detailed understanding of reality, which is there about Dharma, of course, based on the many important texts such as Bhagavad Gita, Vedanta Sutra, Upanishads, and so on, give a very specific cosmic perspective. So I would say there is always a challenge, but in terms of Dharma, I think there would be a great benefit in doing emic and ethic at the same time. And the context of it in India is, of course, yoga, for example, meditation, research about the subject, not just about the object, the body, for example, but consciousness within, which is still very little researched in academics, but very, very important to understand the context and the importance of different paths of yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, or bhakti yoga. So I would say these are very important questions for myself in my own research, and I would say it would be also important in the context of Dharma studies in India.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll open up the space for questions. I think we have time for one or two.
Thanks, Professor Sardella. This is Professor Mohanty here from IIT. At the outset, I congratulate you for your nice presentation. Two clarification I need for my understanding. It's very nice to you discuss Dharma in a metaphysical, epistemological, and Indological note. Do you think Dharma is a form like Kirtan that needs for transcendental movement from self to the other self? And my second question, relating to your nationalism, you discuss about the spiritual nationalism and to some extent cultural nationalism. Do you think that it is a secular alternative to the secularism, the quote unquote secularism in the Western concept in Indian panorama? Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your question. The first, you had two questions. The second one, you have to repeat it because I didn't get it in detail. But your second question is about spirituality. You're questioning whether what will be the space of it for Dharma in today universities compared to secularism, for example. So, I mean, Dharma. One interesting aspect of Dharma is that Dharma is a very including, holistic perspective, which is there in India. But considering the body simply, that which is there with the karma yoga, which is basically our activities, and jnana, which is our knowledge, and bhakti, our devotion, which is more connected to the soul within. So these are different streams, so to speak. But in terms of science, for example, there is the way we do research about science. We give the Nobel Prize again here in Sweden to physics, for example, about quantum physics. There is also the need to start from the bottom up, so to speak, in terms of physics, for example, starting from the atoms and then slowly understanding the cells, the biological diversities which are there, and moving up. But on the other hand, with Dharma, we can also start from the top. We can call it the top, but from consciousness, that's what I mean. The level of consciousness through different research projects, because consciousness, even in terms of Dharma, is a foundational principle we can find in the Vedanta Sutras about Brahman. We can find many texts about consciousness in India. But you can apply it even in practical terms, in social terms, in cultural terms. As I gave an example of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, how he read Dharma from a, you can say, spiritual perspective in the context of the colonial period. So I could say this research, the study, Dharma studies, needs to be very broad, so to speak. And I think that there is a important possibility in terms of modern academic research. So that would be the second part of your question. The first part of the question was, sorry.
Namaskar.
Hello. Yes, Professor.
Yes.
Yeah. It appears to me that you discussed Dharma as a secular concept. My question is it a secular alternative to the secularism, quote unquote, the Western concept of a secularism in Indian panorama?
Oh, exactly. In a sense, religious study, history of religion at Stockholm University is a very secular environment, naturally. But I think the situation in India in terms of secularism is different compared to Europe. And secularism in India through from the colonial period to today is more about protecting different religious forms, different religions in India, and not to 100% separate religion from the secular, which is more the topic in Western European cultures. So I guess that the role of Dharma and Dharma studies in India should be probably different compared to the context in Europe, because there is a different background, and the understanding of Dharma is a very deep understanding in the different culture and societies of India. So there is what I try to say, there is a strong potential that the Dharma studies can develop very strongly in India as well, in different aspects, through the research about consciousness, for example, research about the social, political aspects, about the philosophies, the understanding of reality, that everything is connected, for example, which is very foundational for Dharma, which they're also coming to the same conclusion through quantum physics, that all atoms are connected to each other throughout the entire cosmos. So there are many different aspects that can be developed, explored in India in a different way compared to the European way, but that's in the context of the Indian knowledge systems and other concepts and ideas which are becoming more prominent in India, will give more opening, which will, I think, from my Swedish perspective, will be larger and broader than it would probably be able to be in Europe. And that's, for me, is a very important development possibility. Thank you for your question.
Namaskar. I am a Sanskrit scholar. So I will take two sentences from Sanskrit. Paropakaraya dharmaya papaya parapidanam. Dharma means helping each other, and if you torture other, that is papa. And another thing is this: sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pasyantu, ma kaschit dukkhavag bhavet. Dharma means let everybody be happy, survival and happiness for all, health for all, and everybody should be prosperous. Actually, singing, dancing joyfully with kirtan is part of a celebrating life when there is abundance and there is the principle survival and happiness for all. But it is seldom a case when there is scarcity and people fight with each other with the principle survival for the fittest. So can we change our principle so that it can fit with Dharma? Dhanyavad.
Thank you. This is a very deep question. What you mentioned Dharma, and you mentioned the relationships that we have with each other, and the high level of this relationship that we should develop today. I think also about the Bhagavad Gita, for example, where Krishna tells to Arjuna, Sarvadhamma paritejama mekam sharanam bharaja, aham sarva papebhyo mokshai shamma shuchaha, to give up different dharma paths that he presented to Arjuna and surrender to him instead, do his duty out of love, not for any other reason. Which presents the aspect of freedom, which is very, very important in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Dharma principle. But at the same time, there is also some duties that Krishna speaks to Arjuna. You should do your duty even if it's imperfect, rather than doing something perfectly, but which is not really your duty. So all these perspectives are important in the Dharma traditional understanding, and the challenge now is to see how this can be applied in a more fair, balanced academic system and social system and cultural system, as it looks like today, as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had to do, with many different challenges, economical, cultural, global, the climate challenges that we have, and try to combine it with some of the wisdom and knowledge of the Dharma that we have in the background, that we can attempt and try gradually to do research about, and to understand how, for many people, Dharma is a living form of life, and their understanding of reality is basically a dharmic understanding, and how it can also be applied to different contexts. So thank you very much for your presentation and your points about Dharma, which are very, very relevant today as well. Thank you.
I think, Professor Sardella, there is one more question. This is the last one.
Hello, Professor. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much for an enlightening presentation, but I would actually like to know what is your opinion on the relationship between dharma and caste? If you would like, please enlighten me.
This is not really my really part of research, because I'm into modern history of religion. So I will not be able to really give a very deep replies to that. Of course, I mentioned in my paper as well that caste and Dharma may be interpreted in different ways, but there are different levels you can understand it. So research needs to be followed, of course, about the caste system, and there will be always critique of Dharma. But at the same time, also there is the understanding that if we take some Dharmic foundational text about Atman, for example, that we are the idea of the inner form that we have within, we find also in Jainism, we find them also in some ways in Mahayana Buddhism, the idea that we're actually, we are not these bodies, we are not even the minds, we are inner, and we are the same. So on that level, we can understand that Dharma's understanding of reality is on a different level compared to the superficial level. So they need to be understood, they have to be analyzed, and they both have to be respected in trying to find a common level where both they can function in the best possible way. So that would be a simple reply to your deep question. So I hope. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think I would like now to request Dr. Sumant Rudra to give a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Siddharth. Respected Chair, distinguished scholars, and dear participants, on behalf of the organizing committee of the first annual Dharma conference at IIT Bhubaneswar, I express our sincere gratitude to Professor Ferdinando Sardella for his insightful paper, Revisiting the Historiography of Dharma, Hermeneutics, Modernity, and the Questions of Normativity. Your contribution have greatly enriched our discussion. Our thanks also to Dr. Siddharth Satpathy for chairing the session with clarity and grace, and to all participants for your thoughtful engagement. Thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
And I think we can conclude the keynote address here. Thank you.
Thank you.